As the mayor of the city of Jonesboro, and I've got many of my colleagues out there in the audience, many mayors that's out there, they're keenly aware, the same as I am, that when you start trying to look for local funding on projects for your city, it's extremely tough. And it doesn't make any difference what those projects are, whether it could be transportation, infrastructure, it could be housing, it could be hunger, and the list would go on. And so that's the reason I think that events like this today that we're attending is that we're able to pick up those tools to work together with very many partners throughout the federal, the state, the local. And I learned very quickly as mayor, and I've been in my seventh year, is that if you don't have partnerships, you don't have anything. You don't solo in this business. You have to work with many agencies throughout the federal, state, and again, local. And that's what makes the world go around. It's when we can share and contribute and put in our part and ask for the other part. Example of that, again, is the Highway Trust Fund. Again, Congress only pushed that can down the road. Trust fund's broke in August. They pushed it down 60 days. I don't know how many times they pushed it down, but about 6 weeks ago, I was in D.C. and met with Chairman Schuster and told him that, hey, we need to get a permanent bill. When Secretary Fox sends you that transportation bill for 6 years, because we cannot plan for infrastructure for our state or any other state unless you have a permanent highway bill. That's quite evident in Arkansas when the Highway Department has actually turned down and declined 190 bids, $190 million worth of work in this state, because I agree with them. You cannot enter into contract to do something unless you know you have the funding to complete the project. And so that's something we're having to do. And this all ties back into what we're talking about today, I think, and that is to find tools to help us partner to do things for our community. I've always said that you cannot run a city on sales tax. There's no way in the world that you can do that. So you have to have other funding to do that, and we do that a great deal. We have a grants division that has over $18 to $20 million worth of grants on a day-to-day basis. But we've got folks on that screen looking for money every day, every hour of the day. And we have to do that because the projects that we want to do for our citizens, we cannot do it on the sales tax that we get in through our city. So again, but today I'm very fortunate to have the pleasure to enter someone that is a very distinguished individual. And I had a chance to visit with Dr. Young just a few minutes ago. But she is distinguished in her careers in healthcare, education, philanthropic, as well as the military. And as an educator, she was served on the faculty of two outstanding universities. Both of those were University of Tennessee and the University of Memphis. In addition to receiving the faculty award from University of Tennessee, Health Science College of Nursing, she has mentored countless students and young career professionals. As a healthcare professional, she also graduated summa cum laude. Now, I just barely got out, okay? But she got out summa cum laude. Now, I don't even know what that means other than I know that she's smart, okay? And she received her doctorate from the University of Tennessee, where she is served as president of operations of the St. Joseph Hospital and also maintained a clinical practice there. Her military career started with the United States Nursing Corps Reserves. She received the Legion of Merit Award. She then led a team that received the Air National Guard's first Outstanding Health Promotion Award and achieved the rank of Brigadier General. Now, I was a staff sergeant, and that's 29 steps down below what she was, okay? So to have a Brigadier General in the room is quite an accomplishment. But finally, again, the philanthropic stuff that she does, and she joined in with the, and I hope I pronounce this correct, but ACE Foundation in Memphis in 1995, and 10 years later, she was appointed the executive director. As you know, Arkansas State University, before I bring her on stage, just received, and it was approved, accreditation from COCA to have an osteopathic medical school on this campus. And that will start next year in September. So while we visited, I recruited her I'm not the chancellor, but I just went ahead and took the advantage to recruit her to come on back and be on faculty or whatever she wants to do for our osteopathic medical school. But we'll have 90 to 120 students be coming on this campus to be a doctor starting next year. So, but again, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to someone who seriously has done an outstanding healthcare professional, educator, philanthropist, leader. So please welcome, and let's give her a great Jonesboro welcome, Dr. Jan Young.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I thought when Melissa asked me to be a keynote, I said, what have I done to qualify to be a keynote for a group of experts, right? So I'm not going to pretend to try to tell you anything because you are already the experts in the field. However, I am able to begin the conversation about what to do with this pretty, and as you would say as loving relatives, beautiful baby that's been created over the last few years, your strategic plan for the East Arkansas Planning Development District. Now, you know, it doesn't really matter how pretty or beautiful the baby is if it's not smart, right? So that's my challenge today, to begin the conversation about, okay, now that you have this beautiful plan, so what? What are we going to do to really appropriately implement this plan and to respond to the necessary changes? So that I'm qualified to do, whether it's to ignite the capacity for growth or to have a conversation about igniting the capacity for survival. One of the great examples you heard about survival in a community of igniting that capacity was the Doughboy example that Southern Bancorp presented. The survival of the community depended on maintaining that asset in their community. Okay, so it's on, and we're not clicking. Okay, why are you here today? Would anybody care to share that? Your boss made you come, said this might be a good thing, you get a good free lunch with your registration, it's a nice mental health break from your job. Why are you here? Nobody wants to say. Yes, ma'am. I wanted to find out what you didn't know. Okay, hopefully you've already found out some things you didn't know. And the most important thing that I would say, some of you already know why you're here. Obviously, you chose to be here. You may not want to share it, but what will be different for East Arkansas after you leave? Not just your county, not just your organization, but what will be different for East Arkansas as a result of something you hear today? So that's a challenge for you. So one of the things that I asked Melissa was, you know, does everybody understand where we're headed? And whenever we have this conversation with organizations about where they're headed, remember Alice in Wonderland and her conversation with the Cheshire Cat? We said, look, he said to her, well, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So we have to be really clear about where we're headed as Eastern Arkansas, right? Okay, and then we might look to Goethe, and he said, you know, mankind's progress is rarely in a straight line. We have all these winding turns, and it may resemble a drunken beggar on horseback, winding and reeling and going all over the place. And in the construction of the strategic plan, we wound and reeled all over the place. And if we had to trace that line, someone might think, oh, we were drunk. But the important thing is the horse is headed somewhere. So in order to figure out where the horse was headed, I asked Melissa and her team to give me the top 10. Now, many of you who are more chronologically gifted, like myself, remember the Johnny Carson show followed by Letterman, and Letterman had the top 10, right? So, of course, Melissa gave me, and her team, gave me, Jamie and Jennifer, her consultant, gave me the 7 priorities that you have on your strategic plan as part of the top 10. So we already know what the top 10 is, right? So me going over the top 10 would be little value to this group. But the top 10 challenges for meeting those priorities are what we can share to develop our critical thinking in order to make sure our beautiful baby is smart. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do, you have different colored cards in your packet, and there's a quote on there: if you can imagine it, you can achieve it. If you can dream it, you can become it. The question I asked was, does everybody in Eastern Arkansas understand the vision of the Eastern Arkansas Planning and Development District? And we're not sure. We know that there was community engagement in developing the plan. So I'm going to ask you in 15 words or less to write down your vision for EAPDD. Your own vision. And we're going to have to turn it in now. You can choose to remain anonymous and acknowledge your contribution. That might be a good idea because you might really get a prize. Melissa might give you a prize. Or you can say, you know, I prefer to remain anonymous. The important thing is we'd like to know what your vision is. And I think maybe we can talk Mayor Perrin into, you know, maybe reading a few at the end of the day if we can keep him here. Now, one thing I can tell you about Mayor Perrin, every good officer knew that if they had a strong NCO, things would get done. So obviously, being a great staff sergeant, a great NCO, he's doing a good job as mayor of Jonesboro. Now, in order to look at, so challenge number 1, remember, top 10, challenge number 1, what is the vision statement for EAPDD? Challenge number 2 is, let's look at demographic realities. Brian went over the demographics of our community. We looked at the ages. You know that you have people coming into our community between the ages of 25 to 44 at a higher rate than the rest of the state. Are you going to be able to keep them here? What about your senior population? Do we have the capacity to serve our senior population well in Eastern Arkansas, even though we're geographically dispersed in some areas? What about the issue of race? Have we had honest, clear, authentic conversations about the issue of race? How does race factor into the decisions that we make? Do we have a disproportionate number of people of color in poverty or under-resourced in the community, and why? What are the factors that contribute to that? What about gender? Do we have equity of opportunity for both females and males? Are the affordable living wage jobs that we're creating of equal access to both genders? Do we support both genders equally? In the South, are we consistent with the number of women and men who are getting college degrees or post-secondary education at a level where they can provide adequately for their families? How many jobs do we have to work in Eastern Arkansas in order to achieve the median income of $34,000? Those are the questions that may inform our plan. Now here's challenge number 3. Let's look at political realities. Now before I put the first thing up, I'm going to tell you that I come from the state of Tennessee, and there's a reason that there's 3 stars in the state flag of Tennessee. because we might as well be 3 different states of Tennessee. We have West Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, Eastern Tennessee. We are different in our geography. We are different in our personality. We are different in our culture, and that plays out in the things that come from the legislative seat in Nashville. And often West Tennessee feels like the redheaded stepchild, to use an expression. Now, so how is Eastern Arkansas positioned with the state? And the reason I ask this is I worked with Sister Nardina Quadro, a nun from the Sisters of Charity, who said, you know what, I wish we could have the 51st state. And she wanted the 51st state to be West Tennessee, Eastern Arkansas, and Northwest Mississippi. And she said, because our legislatures in our state don't treat us well, and we don't have an equity position in the way that resources are distributed among the state, in spite of the creative talent and the genius in our sectors of our states. So that was her thing. So I would ask you, in your plan, have we thought carefully about how do we position Eastern Arkansas more effectively within the state? And it looks like there's progress being made. Now, when we talk to people in Eastern Arkansas, how do they respond to those statistics that Brian put up, or the statistics you hear about in the news? Because God forbid that you hear good news, right? Because the news media sells bad news, because that's what we hear most of the time, right? So to use that example, remember Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? He gave the story of the 2 shoe salesmen. 2 shoe salesmen were dropped out of a plane into a jungle-type environment, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. One of the shoe salesmen called back to the home office and said, "What is up with this? What is wrong with our marketing department? Why would you send me to a place where nobody wears shoes? How do you expect me to sell shoes?" Right? 2 minutes later, phone rings. And the other salesman is saying, "Yes, you just sent me to a place that's a target-rich environment. Nobody wears shoes here. I can sell tons of shoes." So, when someone comes to Eastern Arkansas and looks at your statistics, looks at your unemployment rate, looks at the geographic disparities maybe, looks at some of the challenges that you have within Eastern Arkansas, are they like salesman number 1? Or are they like salesman number 2? Do they say, "I can't do anything because that's the way it's always been"? Or like the other person, do they say, as Melissa said about one of the focus group individuals, you know, somebody's got to do something sometime? And which one are you? Okay, here's challenge number 4, the economic realities. Now, the wonderful thing about it is you're going to get a lot of insights about those economic realities and strategies to address them in the afternoon sessions. The afternoon sessions are rich with opportunities for you to discuss that. So when we look at all the socioeconomic classes in the development of the plan, were all of the socioeconomic classes included in your conversations? Did you have people from wealth at your table? Did you have people from middle class as well as people from poverty? When you spoke to the people about jobs, did you also speak to people who are unemployed? And did you just discount them and said, "Well, you know, that family's never worked"? Or, you know, some people just don't want to work in our county anyway? Who did we really have those conversations with our citizen participation and with our conversations? Now, in the issue of affordable living wage jobs, how much of our economy is driven by jobs that pay substandard wages. What is the collateral impact to our businesses if everybody pays the minimum wage? And oh, not just the minimum wage, but if we start all paying an affordable living wage. How will we address that? Now, we know that in this day and time, we talk about the skills and competencies that we used to have as a country in an agrarian economy. And we shifted as a country, and if you remember Sputnik and the launch of, the man on the moon missions and that era of time, you knew that as we were moving out of the industrial age, we went into the knowledge economy. We had the race to space and emphasis on science and math. So if in Silicon Valley, the majority of the economy is driven around the knowledge economy, what we have here in Eastern Arkansas is we are still dealing with all three economies, unlike a lot of parts of our country where we have shifted out of these economies, but we are still supporting in Eastern Arkansas all three of those economies. So that's a different way that our strategic plan will be influenced. Okay, challenge number 5. You see that symbol there? Do you hear the music? Okay. Sometimes we feel like we're in the twilight zone, don't we? Because we're living with all those pressures of those three economies. And so the contextual reality of what we're living in this day and time in the 21st century is what you hear about a lot of time from economists and others as an era of disruptive change. Now, I'm not sure why people are saying it as if it's something new. If you look at people who are in the communication industry, some of you remember party lines at home, right? You remember rotary dial phones, and then we moved to the little punch the button phones, and then we moved to no landlines at all, and now voice over IP, right? Now that's disruptive change. The only difference is that change is coming a lot faster now than it used to. Remember the big, huge satellite dishes? And then we went to the small box, and now we have no box? That's disruptive change for that industry. But the changes that are coming at us are coming at a much faster pace, which people say, well, it's disruptive change. It's not anything new, and you already have demonstrated your ability to deal with it and be resilient under that period of change, because we all survived that, right? We have a memory of all that. How many other generations saw that level of change in their lifetime? They would probably argue that they did. We just didn't imagine their changes as just as great as ours. The civic analytics. We're being challenged now to measure things differently. We're being challenged to measure things in a way that we didn't look at them before. In a different era, we were expected to produce different documentation for the projects and the programs that we did. Challenge number 6. Eastern Arkansas, and you can say to people as you have conversations, what's the personality of Eastern Arkansas? Somebody tell me, how do you know that someone's from Eastern Arkansas? What is unique about someone from Eastern Arkansas? Anybody? Is there anything that automatically lets you know that somebody's from Eastern Arkansas? Anybody? They know where Jonesboro is, okay. And let me ask you this. Is there something different about Northeast Arkansas versus Southeast Arkansas? Yes. Oh. So Northeast Arkansas, we really know that you know where Jonesboro is. Now, what's unique about Southeast Arkansas? Okay, so the southeast part of the state may feel less resourced than the northeast part of the state. Okay, but is there a way that you can tell that someone came from southeast Arkansas? No. Okay, but there's a mindset that's environmental, and not just environmental like Paul's conservation easement that he works on all the time, but environmental in the context of political realities and all the other realities that we put up there. So it's not just about the green stuff, it's about the other stuff. Some people think, you know, there's nothing else we can do. We are limited by our geography. We are limited by where we are located in the country. We are limited because we're in southeast Arkansas and we just don't have resources. Or we have great opportunity because we're in northeast Arkansas and that's where all the vibrancy is. So how much of that influences decision-making and our thinking as we move through our plan? How much does our cultural DNA affect our decision-making? What is it about the values of the agrarian community or the industrial manufacturing base that significantly influences the way that we move into the knowledge economy? And are we able to compete? What about historical, the way that we've always done it, thinking? How does that affect and inform our current decision making? How much courage do we have to break that? Because history can either inspire us or hold us hostage. Which one will we be? Challenge number 7. When I look at your priorities, it reminds me of Maslow's needs and the pyramid. Many of the priorities are based on the first 2 stages. Basic human needs, housing issues, food insecurity. As a community, there's a lot of strength in relationships and bonding that you do, but we're not there at self-actualization. Maybe northeastern Arkansas, some would argue, might be closer. But southeastern Arkansas, and this isn't about dividing eastern Arkansas, it's about eastern Arkansas as a whole, right? So, what can we do to go to actualization as a region, not just a single community? Challenge number 8. How do we hold ourselves accountable at each one of these levels? At the individual level. When will the dialogue be completed with all of this? This comes from the Bridges Out of Poverty work that Jody Farr Consulting developed. How much does institutional practice drive individual behavior and vice versa? What do we allow the institutions to do within the community infrastructure that either impedes our success or accelerates it? And how do all 3 work together to inform policy without creating collateral damage that you might hear in election campaign rhetoric for policies that are popular but not well thought out? That's challenge number 8. And you do have some sessions to address that in the afternoon. Challenge number 9. Can we do it with the same leadership styles? Melissa said one of the priorities is leadership development. There's been certainly a shift from individual-based leadership work. The majority of the leadership literature that you will read and available to you is based on how do we develop individuals as leaders. And that is, you know, that's part of our DNA as a country, right? We do look at that individual accountability, that individual leadership framework. What we're seeing now is the shift to leadership styles that contribute to developing relationships. and creating that bridging and social capital so necessary to have progressive movement forward. Leadership no longer can be linear. It must be nimble or flexible. There are companies now who are rewarding their managers for knowing how to fail fast. They are rewarding their managers for how quickly they can adapt to change. Because remember, we are in the era of adaptive change. How well positioned are we to create these new leaders? You know, we're shifting from Newtonian thinking to quantum thinking. We cannot still have the mechanistic view. We are going into quantum thinking, and our measures that are being required for the programs and projects we do are making that shift. Are we prepared to make that shift? Are we prepared to take the best of both, because we live in 3 economies in Eastern Tennessee? Number 10, challenge number 10. There is a shift of power. And if you look at the Harvard Business Review article from December 2014 by Jerry Hymans and Henry Timms, you'll have a chance to look at this. And the way that they defined power was Bertrand Russell's ability to produce the intended results. In the old power base, power was like currency. You could dole it out, you could pull it back. Now in the new paradigm, it's like an electric current. All of you heard about the Arab Spring. There was a time that an Arab Spring would not have been possible and whole governments toppled because of the internet. That is because the shift of power. All day long, you have heard about participatory power and citizen engagement from the old consumer-based power. The fundings used to be based only on traditional institutions, and I know we still see a lot of that, but more and more, if you don't know about Kiva and you're in Eastern Arkansas, I invite you to explore that. That's a whole different type. Talk to Southern Bancorp. Dr. Neal is shaking her head yes. So go ahead and talk to her about Kiva and WeFunder and crowdfunding. Those are other strategies to explore for all of you nonprofits out there. You know, site-based production is important. Steve from Marmaduke says, yes, by golly, it's important. You know, bless his heart, he has only 52 people in his community that works at that ARI plant. He doesn't even charge the people from Peregrine Toll to come there. So I understand now why Todd from Rector is so nice to him, because, you know, he lets his people come over there and work in his plant and doesn't even charge them toll to get there. But, you know, although site-based production is very helpful and may be the answer for Northeastern Arkansas, we might need to go to Etsy and YouTube and other types of entrepreneurial funding opportunities for those who live in our less resourced communities. We're going from traditional ownership models to open source models, peer-directed decentralized systems. That is very hard for people to do who are used to only traditional based models, but that is our challenge. You know, a lot of the millennials are looking at those like me and saying, retire, go away, we need your job. I mean, quit taking up the space, right? We're just not going away, we're not listening. You know, so, but we have to find a place for them to work and have valuable contributions, right? Because they are the future of that new power. So, here are the old power values and the new power values. The radical transparency scares a lot of companies. But there's a company called Bridgewater Hedge Fund, for those of you who are in financial institutions. Their whole employment structure and HR resources built on radical transparency. Look up their culture. It is a fascinating work model. Everybody knows what the CEO's evaluation is. That's sent out to the entire number of employees immediately after it's done. It's a way of holding everybody accountable at a different level. So, although we still prize and award long-term affiliations and loyalty, and it's so important, so many of the new power values are based on short-term and conditional affiliations. Now, you know, we complain sometimes about our millennial workforce and our younger people not staying at jobs for 20 years. Why would they? They saw their parents get fired after 20 years, downsize, reduction in force. They never got the gold watch. What trust do they have in the main institutions, right? Are we surprised that that might be their assessment? Well, we've got to look at that, right? And so if you want to explore these concepts further, I've given you the source, and I think you'll get a copy of the slides. So, in order for EAPDD to be successful, what are the help wanted competencies, if you will, for all of you who are willing to commit yourself to the work? And I would venture to guess that you're largely part of the 20% Pareto's rule that's going to do the work anyway. So, we know that we have to have people who are willing to engage in relationships of mutual respect. And that's across the field, across sectors, across all economic classes. We know that we are going to have people who are bilingual and perhaps trilingual in the language of power and how power is leveraged within our communities. We know that we're going to have a different architecture and infrastructure to accomplish everything we want to do. So, even though I'm concluding my portion of the keynote, this is where we need to start. Why does EAPDD exist? If we start with why, all the what will be easy, because we can always test the what we're doing to make sure it's congruent with the why that we're doing it. And it'll solve a lot of conflict. So that is what I leave you with. Start with why. Thank you.